First of all, by the way, Viva Fry, David Fry, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida Rumbler, live daily, 3 o'clock on the Rumble lineup. I will publish this to CommieTube afterwards because I think it's important nonetheless for the audience at CommieTube to understand what injustices went down on January 6th for the next 4 years and how, in my view, not to load the conversation, they have not been adequately remedied. And the only question is that accurate? And if so, why? I'm going to bring on Will right now. Sir, Will, how goes the battle?
Hey, pleasure to be with you, Viva.
It's amazing because, there are a lot of Jan 6ers who got pardons. And although I know a lot of the stories of a lot of them, it's tough to get to everybody. It's tough to get to everyone who is, injured by the jab. It's tough to get to everybody who experienced unbearable injustices under COVID tyranny. It's impossible to get to all 1,500 people who suffered to greater or lesser degrees under January 6th. I'm going to satisfy my neuroses. I gotta bring it in like this. Will, tell the world who you are.
Yeah, and to begin with, I didn't actually get pardoned because if you look at President Trump's executive order, it was a 3-part order. There were some commutations, and then anyone who had been convicted got pardoned, and anyone who hadn't been convicted, they had their case dismissed. So I had never been convicted. I got arrested on February 12th, 2021. We're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of that as well. And for the first year and a half or so, I kept a low profile. I was not happy with my appointed counsel. And so in the summer of 2022, I made the decision to begin representing myself. And from there on out, I defended myself in court and took a very novel approach to my legal strategy and had quite a bit of success. I beat 3 charges before Trump even was inaugurated. So
let me highlight one thing here because it'll come back to another January 6th story, which is the January 5th pipe bomber. The pardon had 3 facets to it, like you said. Those convicted and those facing charges had their charges dropped. Some people have been floating the argument that Brian Cole Jr. was arguing, alleging that he did it and alleging it was because he was unhappy with the election to get the pardon. But as far as I read it, the pardon didn't cover people who were not charged, and certainly not covering people who committed acts on January 5, not on January 6. But if we can, I hope it doesn't bother you. I want to go all the way back to the beginning. First of all, Will, how old are you?
I am 39 right now.
Okay, good. And now, where are you from?
I'm calling in from Topeka, Kansas, so right in the heart of the country here.
Born and raised?
No, born in Iowa, but I grew up here in Kansas, and then I moved around the country and came back. I've worked in some pretty cool places. I actually worked for the National Park Service for a long time, so I lived at the bottom of the Grand Canyon and in Yellowstone and all over.
Am I totally unrelated? National parks, am I crazy or overly neurotic for thinking that they're dangerous, that people commit a lot of crimes on federal parks or national parks and you don't want to be hiking there anymore?
I think a lot of that is made up. I've heard about it, but I've lived there and I had no issue with it. I think overall a national park is probably a safer place for you to be than Chicago or New York or wherever. But I think that grew out of nothing.
39, so you're 34 at the time all of this goes down. If I may, because it will be relevant later on in terms of how you successfully pro se litigated for yourself. What was your education upbringing?
I've got 2 master's degrees right now, and I was in a PhD program at the time. I'm still in that PhD program. I'm now a PhD candidate working on my dissertation. So I did have an education, but I didn't have a legal education. And I had to kind of learn on the fly a lot of the nuance to how to defend yourself.
All right. And now, politically wise, in terms of your family, were you from a family of conservatives? I mean, I know what I would think of. You said Iowa, not Idaho, right?
Iowa, yeah.
Okay.
When I first registered to vote, I registered Reform Party, independent for a long time. And then Kansas dropped recognition of Reform Party, and I registered Republican at that point. But I also went to Washington on January 6th because I'm a journalist and I was going to cover the events of that day. In my mind, it's not good for America if we doubt our public institutions. So the fact that people were kind of wondering if the government had been rigged, if the election had been rigged, was not good for our country. And I wanted to cover that. And I thought at the time, I thought it would be best to have an audit to increase the confidence in it. Like as a PhD student, I look at data, and there were data anomalies with 2020, but like I don't have the full data set to say for sure that a vote went missing here or there. But I did think that an audit would have helped to improve the confidence of the American people in their government.
So you go down. I say some people may or may not believe the excuse as an independent journalist. What was your outlet at the time when you went down, or your entity?
So I had my own company, Free State Kansas, and I published online, and was doing pretty well with that. But I got shut down on Facebook and banned for life. Um, and Twitter, I'm pretty much only on Twitter now at Free State Will.
Free State. Well, you got shut down as a result of what happened on January 6th, or was it beforehand or after being charged?
Yeah, correct. So they charged me, and my Facebook got deactivated in about May of 2021, permanently deactivated. They allow you to go in and appeal. I filed an appeal, and they never responded to the appeal. They kept me banned, and they've never done anything with that appeal. So I'm still banned for life.
Okay, so you go down. It's actually we won't play the full video. I covered it last week, but we're going to walk through it. You go down on when did you go down? January 5th, or were you down there a couple of days early?
Well, I began driving out January 4th, and my brother flew in. I picked him up in Philadelphia on January 5th, the evening of January 5th, and then we took the metro into town on the morning of January 6th.
Okay, and so you weren't there. You were not there on the 5th when we saw the infamous video of Ray Epps seemingly planning things out for the 6th.
No, so I'm not the pipe bomber, not me.
Well, we don't know. They might have been planted at a different time. Okay, so you get down there on January 6th. What time do you get down there, and what's your intention for the day?
Uh, well, my brother and I, we were looking at it as the final speech, perhaps, of President Trump's presidency, final public appearance. And that was a historical event. We wanted to do that, but we also wanted to check out a lot of the national monuments and memorials in Washington. So we spent a lot of the morning just kind of walking to like the Lincoln Memorial and the Korean Vietnam War memorials, and checking that out. And we had a national park road trip that we planned to do immediately after that. But those plans kind of got thrown off by the events of January 6th.
Okay, and so what happens? What's your involvement on the day of, and walk us through it?
All right. So we were watching the speech at the ellipse area. We were actually kind of farther back in the crowd, near the Washington Monument. After the speech, I think we left that area maybe 5 or 10 minutes after the speech. We walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, and we reached the Capitol about 1:40. So people had already been on the grounds for nearly an hour, and we got there. It was a time when it was relatively peaceful. There were no flashbangs going off or anything like that, and the grounds were full of people. So we had no idea that there had been any commotion at the Peace Circle or any of that had gone down. And every time I'd gone to Washington, you'd been able to walk right up to the Capitol. So I had no impression that anything was out of the ordinary at that point.
Okay, and so there's, I guess, explain to the people, because there's various sides to the Capitol building. Not all of the sides had the infamous photos of the gallows and people breaking windows.
Mhm. Correct. Yeah, I never even saw the gallows that day. I know where they were at now because I've done a lot of research. But yeah, we walked up and we went on the west front at first, and then it was a little bit crowded there. There were a lot more people there, and we decided, you know what, we'll walk to the other side of the Capitol. Probably going to be because we didn't want to be in like a real crowded area. That was our entire reason for like hanging out by the Washington Monument too. So we walked around to the east side. About the time, a little after we got there, the gates came down on the east side. People went on to the East Plaza. And my brother and I, we were kind of hanging out in a courtyard between the north and the center steps. And that would kind of begin where that video was that you saw that I put together.
Okay, and so you basically, I mean, I'll pull up the video as you're talking, but you enter the building. To say it was non-aggressive, non-violent, it's an understatement. How do you get in the building? Who's leading you in? And I guess, what did you do that day before the charges that you faced?
All right. So everybody probably is aware of the footage of the windows being broken on the west side. Dominic Pizzola has the shield, people climbing in through the windows. So after those people got in, they began walking down the hallways, right? And some of them took a left and then they took a right. And that took them to the Senate carriage doors. And a few of the police in there, they opened the doors up. They began letting people flow out the east side of the building. And my brother and I, we were about to take off. We were a little bit tired and hungry, but I noticed that there were people coming out of doors under the steps. And yeah, here we go, right there.
I'm going to keep it on mute so you can walk us through this. But
yeah, we're looking at the courtyard area right there, and then here is the door under the steps, the Senate carriage door, and we saw people pouring out, and we went out up to check it out. Obviously, it seemed like a big thing going on, and as a journalist, I wanted to observe it, check it out. But we didn't know how the people had gotten there because we were not on the other side of the building.
Okay.
And yeah.
And so how do you find out how they get inside, and how do you get inside the building yourself?
Well, I didn't find out how they got on in until much later. Like, I didn't begin researching it for a long time after that. But so those people, a few of them came out, and that one guy in the green there that you showed, he had come through the building. He'd been one of the first up at the top of the scaffolding, one of the first on Capitol grounds. And then he came out the Senate carriage doors, but then he decided he wanted to go back in and keep the doors open. And so at one point he tried to push through an officer. He knocked the guy over right there. And the officer kind of pushed him back.
It's this guy right here.
Yeah, that guy. He's got a gas mask on.
Yeah, and he's well, we're going to get back to this. He's pushing people into the building while there's police at the door, wearing a gas mask, and you only find out who this guy is 3 years into the charges, give or take.
Correct. Yeah. Like I had a vivid memory after that of being pushed into the building, but I didn't even have access to the discovery for a couple years of my case, so I couldn't even identify him. But when I began representing myself in the summer of 2022, I pinpointed, I identified who the man was who pushed me into the building. And I sent a picture of him to the prosecutor on my case. Like, I need this guy identified. Who is this guy? And they said the government had no information on him. And over the next 2-3 years, I continued asking, like, hey, do you guys have any information? And every time they came back, they said they had no information. Eventually, though, he got arrested. Well, I filed a motion to compel on him, and the court denied my motion, but Judge Contreras reminded the government that if they did have anything on him, they had an obligation to produce it to me, because the government had conveyed to the court that they had no information, that there was no information in their possession, so they had no discovery obligation. Well, that wasn't true, because they had gotten tips on the guy back in 2021, both with a photograph and his name. So they did have the identity of the guy. And after the court continued to push them, hey, you have a responsibility if you have that information, they arrested the guy about the time of what would have been my original trial date. And my original trial date got continued because of the Fisher v. United States case. That was the top charge in my case that I was facing, a 20-year felony. And the Supreme Court threw that out. The government wanted to figure out how they were going to handle the new legal reality after that. And so they moved to continue my trial date. But they already had in motion that they were going to arrest this guy. And it would have happened that they would have only produced that information right about the time my trial began.
And what year was that?
2024.
So 3 years later, they identified this guy. We're going to get back to him in a second. I just want to show this part, and you'll walk us through this. This is basically the conduct for which you were charged and arrested. This is you over here in the red jacket. Coming in, you're carrying a flag. They're eventually going to say that you used the flag to jam open the door. And we can go forward a little bit. Basically, you're being pushed in by the crowd. You're standing near the door. And at one point, the flagpole does get stuck in the hinges of the door, and you discover this only because it starts jerking the flag out of the wrong way, and you take it back immediately. And this was as far as you got into the building the day of.
No, they shut the doors there, and so we ended up wandering farther. Like after they locked us in the Capitol, they had people go to the other end of the hallway, and then eventually they released that group into the Capitol. Like they let people go, and we didn't know it at the time, but they were about to move the vice president, which is why I think they let people kind of go from that area. But yeah, they're at the government accused me for all those years of wedging a flagpole in the door. And there are even officers in their 302 saying, "Yeah, he wedged it in the door." But if you look at the video, those officers weren't even looking at the door or the flagpole; they were looking in the opposite direction when it happened.
No, what I mean, when anybody says, like, you wedged your flagpole into the door to leave it open so the crowd can charge in. I mean, we typically, at least in my mind, anticipate putting it in, blocking two doors, acting in a very proactive manner, not having the tip get stuck as the doors are about to close, and then you realizing and taking it out, which was clear as day. That's part of that's the extent, give or take, of your conduct of that day. What did they charge you with?
I had 8 charges totaling 30 years, right? And two of them, they charged me with blocking ingress and egress, which I think were related to the door. They eventually had to drop that because statutorily they didn't meet the conditions for my conduct, didn't meet the conditions for that charge. And I filed for a bill of particulars. The judge granted that, and they couldn't come up with the particulars, so they had to drop the 2 charges on that. But again, like I was in that position because after that man pushed me into the Capitol, I immediately returned to the door trying to get back out, waiting for an opportunity to get out with my brother. And it became much more chaotic because the police had been letting people out up to that point, and then it became chaotic and they tried to shut the doors. So
This is the moment where you realize your flag gets stuck in the door because
yeah.
the door
Well,
doesn't
and
close.
if you go a little farther back, like the only reason it got stuck there is because two officers who were right next to me bumped me, and you can see in the video they
Wait,
bumped, and then
yeah,
the flag went.
you look like a kid who got, who did something by accident. If I'm projecting, so that's 8 charges, 30 years. I guess I'm dying to know, when
Yeah.
did you get arrested and when did you know that you were probably in trouble?
Well, I got arrested February 12th, 2021, very early on. Uh, I kind of got a feeling like they were going to make it trouble before then because the FBI was trying to contact me. And, foolishly, like I got a local attorney very quickly. He was not very good, but I got him. And because the FBI said, "Hey, we'd like to talk to you about it." And I was like, "Well, I've got an attorney. Let me talk to him." I didn't know it, but I went to meet with my attorney that day, but he had arranged for the FBI to show up
Hmm.
at the same time. And so we ended up meeting. It really wasn't the worst thing in the world. They mischaracterized a few of the details of that meeting, but they did try to confront me. They tried to like accuse me of creating that situation at the door, and I'm like, "What in the world are you describing?" Because nothing like that even happened right there. And at that point, we kind of shut the interview down, and uh, you know, we fought. I fought for 4 years after that, but
Well, where were you when you got charged? Like, did they come to your house and take you into
they
custody?
did. Yeah, yeah. They came to my house. They had probably 15 or 20 officers, and they arrested me on the Friday before President's Day weekend, which and they didn't have a judge available for a hearing, which meant I had to spend 4 days in jail before I got a hearing. Um, I think they did that intentionally.
There's zero question that they did. It's
Yeah.
common tactic. So you spend 4 days. Are those the only 4 days you spent in detention?
Yep. They never got me.
Okay, so you get out after you get. What were the terms of your release? Bail conditions.
Initially the terms were, obviously stay out of trouble, you know, remain in my educational program, continue to be employed, things like that. No weapons of any kind. Actually, when my case got moved to Washington, that was the magistrate conditions. But when it got moved to Washington, he actually took a few of the conditions away, and it got a little bit lighter. But I had to call in every week for 4 years to pretrial, check in, let them know, where I'm at. Anytime I traveled out of state, I had to let them know 2 days beforehand. Really a pain in the neck, but that all ended right after the inauguration.
Okay, so now it's the 4 years of lawfare that are going to be of particular interest. Um, you were first of all, where are you living in the meantime? Like you have to go into DC every time there's a hearing, or how's that working?
Well, the world changed right about then due to COVID, and they began doing a lot of remote hearings. So, in a way, that was very fortunate because you had people all over the country, and rather than having to travel back to Washington, we could, call in via Zoom, do the hearing that way. And so, for the most part, I did have one hearing in person in 2024, but for the most part, we did it all remotely. Now, if you had a trial, you had to go do that in person. So a lot of people did it eventually end up in court. But fortunately, the one blessing of COVID is we didn't have to travel to Washington.
You said your judge was Contreras.
Correct. Yeah.
He was the Michael Flynn judge, as far as I recall, before he had to recuse himself. Okay, so you're facing these charges, 30 years, you got a lawyer. At first, I imagine the goal is just defend yourself. It's not at all costs. It's going to be to defend yourself without thinking more proactively, like I was set up. As it all unfolds and it goes from being described as an insurrection to a fedsurrection, at what point do you start becoming aware of the fact that A, the prosecutors are not disclosing material evidence to you, and B,
Mhm.
that the FBI or Capitol Police might have been actively involved in instigating this from the get-go?
Well, I knew right away the government wasn't being honest based on the accusations they were making against me. So that was a harsh reality from the very beginning. Late in 2021, I began going through the video and really digging into it from kind of an academic research, like very meticulously, right? And I got to be very good at it, very adept, and even to the point where I began helping a few of the defense attorneys, helping them on their case, helping them with the factual matters. And, it came to become like the one advantage I had. And I believed at the time that if I began representing myself and had more access to the discovery, like I would be able to find things that nobody else could. Because a lot of the attorneys, they might be good on matters of law, but they really didn't know like the video and the facts of the day. Um, and I never did get the full access to discovery that I wanted, but by representing myself, I was able to um, file a lot of things that became very inconvenient for the government because I pointed out different undercovers in the crowd, discovery that they had withheld, a lot of different things.
Well, let's flesh this out, if I may. And I don't want to get you into
Yeah,
trouble. So if you can't answer, don't answer. But I'm going to ask anyhow. When
sure.
do you start discovering undercovers in the crowd? What's the indication that they're undercovers? And ultimately, what's the identity of these undercovers?
Yeah, well, early on, I began looking for unusual things in the video, just the public video floating around in the internet. And, I see an unusual thing. I kind of make a note of that, ask questions about it. Um, some of the people that I believed were acting as provocateurs, I dug into them a little bit more, found out a lot of them had connections to federal intel agencies, and nobody wanted to talk about that. But the government is very good at covering up their tracks in these cases. So you bring material like that um, into a motion, they're going to find a way to shoot it down. You really have to have on paper, like, hey, this guy is a verified Fed, right? Rather than them claiming to be working for an intel agency, you have to have documentation. So late in 2022 and early 2023, I filed a few motions on the undercover Metro PD who were in the crowd. You had like three of them who famously were kind of walking through the crowd. One guy had a GoPro, and they decided they were going to go up to the Upper West Terrace. And the officer began repeatedly urging, hey, people, move forward, and actually physically pushing on them to go up the steps to the Capitol.
When you say, sorry,
And
and just to make sure that that's clear, move forward is in move forward up and into the building and not move forward, I don't know, back to wherever.
Yeah, I mean, he was climbing the steps to the Capitol at that point.
And
There's a crowd of 100, 200 people in front of him.
he's not uniformed.
No, they were undercover. That got produced in Discovery, but nobody was actually looking at that. But I was very meticulous about reading what they put in Discovery, and that was one of the first things that I went to.
If you can't mention their names, can you mention what happened to them since? Have they been disciplined? Are they still with Metro PD? Have they been fired or promoted?
Well, yeah, I've done numerous filings on them. The one officer with the GoPro, Officer Tomasula, he they did. I filed a motion on it in late 2023, and yeah, the government hated it so much that they moved to put it under seal. Uh, but essentially, the motion described a investigative report that Metro PD had done on that officer and the conduct of their undercovers that day. And I think he did get into a little bit of trouble. Um, there have been a few reports come out about people getting disciplined, but it seemed like he might have only gotten like a 10-day. The problem with the reports coming out about them getting disciplined, they don't have a name on it, but the description kind of matches what we know of the guy. So
And
it
so
seems
there's
like he only got it like a slap on the wrist from it.
but there is an acknowledgement that they had undercover Metro PDs who were not clothed, who never identified themselves as such, who were, if not instigating, at least participating. So that they confirmed that they had undercovers in the crowd.
Yeah, we had that in Discovery. We had the documentation of it. We had video they recorded. And then I was good enough to actually go through other video and find places where they recorded video that they had not produced that in Discovery. And I would point it out to the government. And eventually the government had to come back and produce more of what they recorded in Discovery because I found them recording in another area. Um,
What was the rationale for why they had undercover Metro PD that were not identifying themselves as such?
uh, well, they were from a unit, the electronic surveillance unit for the DC police, and they go around filming, people causing trouble or whatever. But what they're not supposed to do is like engage with the crowd or tell them to move forward or join in chants or anything like that. And you had these officers who were up on the Capitol and they were actually like taking selfies of each other, singing the national anthem. Like I would love for that to be seen by the world, but unfortunately, Pam Bondi has not released that video, and I don't have the authority to release it. But they actually recorded themselves singing the national anthem with protesters on the Capitol, and the world has never seen it. I have, but not the world.
And you got names and identities of actual plainclothed undercover Metro PD that were in the crowd, ostensibly either participating or instigating.
Yep.
Um, okay, you said Pam Bondi won't release that. Before jumping on that bandwagon, which I'm inclined to, under whose jurisdiction would that be? I mean, this is in the federal case that's under seal.
Yeah, I mean, it is in the Discovery. They have I mean, it was filmed by PD. They could release it if they wanted to. And in fact, I believe the Trump administration took over running the Metro PD. So they're running that department as well. So if they needed to approve it from within the department, they could do that. But yeah, the Trump DOJ is actually still fighting me in court, trying to get me to return all the discovery of the undercovers who were filming in the crowd. Like normally under the protective order, any defendant could keep whatever discovery they had access to. Anything highly sensitive, we never got access to, but anything sensitive, we were able to keep. And but in my case, they actually filed to require me to return that after my case was over. And so I am still fighting that. I've got an active appeal in the DC circuit right now.
You've got an active appeal despite the fact that the remaining charges were dropped. And
Yeah.
in theory, your case is over, save and except for the fact that you want to make public the documentation that you got, or you
Well,
just
no, I'm gonna comply with the protective order, but for me, like I filed a lot of motions where I pointed out undercovers in the crowd, and if the government is going to like claw back that documentation supporting my motions, I have a real problem with that because um, it is kind of verifying like what I filed, and I also have it intertwined with my case notes, and to claw it back, I would essentially be destroying the knowledge that I put together, right? Um,
Who was your prosecutor?
oh, I had over a dozen of them. I'd whip them and then they'd throw another one at me. But
Did did you ever come across one by the name of Jocelyn Ballantyne in your case?
she was never on my case. But yeah, she worked the Proud Boys case. But yeah, I had a few doozies myself, and I believe most, if not all of them, have been fired. But um, yeah, they all should be fired by now.
Okay. And okay, now, so how many through your own research, you're determining that there's undercovers, feds is sort of a loaded term. If it's confidential human sources or actual undercover agents, through your own sleuthing throughout your 4-year ordeal, how many Fed or Fed adjacent elements, individuals, did you identify in the crowd? If you can't identify them, just tell us what happened to them, if any of them faced any charges or had participated in behavior and never faced any charges.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you stack it, but yeah, quite a few. Like whether it be like one body cam I found of DC police pulling over men that they suspected to have undercover weapons, and then those men pull out their law enforcement badges showing that they're DEA agents, and they're walking in the direction of the Capitol while Trump is speaking. That would be one of them. We have found FBI in the crowd. One motion I filed showed, and I had to do it by triangulating video, but I showed that Baker Dowdy and another agent from the Washington field office were in the crowd with former FBI liaison John Guandolo. And as people were running up the East Steps, the agent began clapping and saying, "Oh man, this is huge." And we verified not only from Guandolo, he had a sworn affidavit in another case, an unrelated case, that he had been with FBI on January 6th. So he verified it. But we actually have the video of the agent, and we can match it to a picture of the guy on the FBI website to show, yeah, that is Agent Baker Dowdy of the Washington field office. Here he is walking through the crowd. Here he is going up to the FBI SWAT team when they arrive, talking with them for 5 minutes. Yeah, so we do have plainclothes FBI that I've identified in the crowd, a lot of undercover police, and then you got a lot of provocateurs who claim to be connected to whatever three-letter agency, and they never got touched.
Well, that's actually more specifically where I'm going with this. The people who would be or could be qualified as provocateurs, you never ran into Ray Epps on the day of?
I never ran into, not that I know of, I don't think I ever ran into Ray Epps. But having gone through the video, there were a lot of people like Ray Epps. Ray Epps gets all the attention, but there were people that were combing through the crowd early in the morning, bullhorning or telling people, hey, after Trump is done speaking, we're going to the Capitol. They were doing the same thing Ray Epps was, but we have more documentation of him and he became more famous. So in my mind, and I studied communication, that looked like a coordinated communication campaign, like weaving through the field, right? You don't just have people sharing the same message randomly, right? But
Well,
yeah, a lot of the, like Megan Paradise would be one. She went around bullhorning early in the day that, hey, we're gonna storm the Capitol after Trump is done speaking. Then she went down to the Capitol. She was urging people to storm the gates. Then when she got up to the top of the steps, she was urging people to take the police shields. Then she went into the Capitol. She was in Nancy Pelosi's office. She stole a baseball. And then she talked to the FBI like a day or two later, gave them her phone. The contents of her phone got produced in discovery, and she never got arrested. So, and she was right next to Ray Epps at the corner of 15th and Constitution on the morning of January 6th. So, I mean, there are a lot of things like that where, like, what actually happened? Why did she get left alone and I had to fight for my life for 4 years? But
so hold on.
maybe if I,
This is new. I mean, I'm just. I don't want to bring it up. Is Megan Paradise? Someone says it's Adam Carolla's niece. I don't know if that's possibly true.
correct, that
It,
is,
it, it is Adam Carolla's niece.
yeah.
And she never faced any charges.
Never did. She met with the FBI. She gave them her phone. She never got arrested, but she was on a bullhorn telling people to storm the Capitol. She was battling with police at the gates. They never touched her.
I wonder if
In
that's
fact,
go for it.
so here, like, there's a lot of video that the world has never seen, but I've seen it because it was in Discovery. And so she was recording on her phone in Nancy Pelosi's office. She had her feet up on a desk. And then Big O Barnett, the famous guy who had his feet on the desk, he walks in the room. He sees her with her feet on the desk. And because of that, he sits on the desk next to her and puts his feet up there. And yet Big O got arrested like 2 or 3 days later. Megan never got touched.
Did you do? I mean, one could think it might be some political connection. Maybe she comes from a family of celebrities. If she is in fact Adam Carolla's niece, although he's probably politically at the time as toxic as everybody else. Employment? Do you know what she does, or did you ever look into her past to see if she had any, other than not getting arrested, any overt ties to intelligence, or not intelligence, but to authorities?
She would, she went to a lot of protests in 2020 and the lead up to January 6th. In fact, she made national news on NBC a couple days before January 6th because they were going through a mall in California and yelling at people who were wearing masks and just making a commotion. So she was a bit of a provocateur before then, but like, I don't like the legal, like, Lady Justice, she should be blind. Like, why should I be arrested and she not be when she was telling people to take police shields? Like, I don't get that.
Who else did you ever identify any of the individuals on the bullhorns who might have been orchestrating this?
I did. Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of people telling people to storm the Capitol that day. And I'd like to point out that it didn't only happen on the day of. There were people trying to get people to go to Washington in the weeks leading up to that. In fact, one guy, Sam Andrews, called for 500,000 armed men to go to Washington. And he did that in mid-December. And this guy worked for a three-letter agency back in the day. He admitted that. And he did it on the Doug Hagman show. Doug has admitted to being an FBI asset. And they called for 500,000 armed men to go to Washington in early December. And then Sam Andrews and his group showed up at the Peace Circle about 10 or 15 minutes before Ray Epps got there. And then, they walked around the building. Eventually, they made their way onto the lawn, the West Lawn, and they're reporting into the Doug Hagman show live. And Doug tells them to breach the chambers live on his show. They never get touched. But he worked for a three-letter agency back in the day and was an oath keeper in Ferguson and whatnot.
3 letters in FBI or CIA, or do you know?
I have been told probably CIA. The person I have one source says CIA. Sam Andrews says he was a defense contractor and also worked for a three-letter agency doing compartmented operations internationally, which to me would be probably CIA or DIA or whatever.
This is very interesting. Let me bring this up here. It says exiled oathkeeper called for rifles at the Capitol. Now he's spooked about the FBI. Did he face any charges?
He did not. Yeah, he claimed that they came to knock on his door a couple days after, but they never did anything to him. But back during the Ferguson riots, he was on the ground there, and he admitted to, I think, Gawker and Rolling Stone that he worked for a three-letter agency.
Interesting. All right. And so how many, I guess a couple of very specific questions. The day of, were you near any of the less than lethal force that was being inflicted upon the crowd?
No, I think they did use like or somebody used a flashbang or something up on the East Steps. I don't think the police actually used it. I don't know who did, but most of the munitions were on the other side of the Capitol, and I didn't deal with any of that.
So you defend it I don't need to get into why you were displeased with your lawyer. I can understand why not everybody can be an effective pro se litigant. You get rid of your lawyer, you fight these things on your own. You get discovery, which reveals what were some of the prime examples of what's what I'm looking for, exculpatory evidence that was withheld from you until you pushed and prodded to get it released.
Well, I mentioned the identity of the guy who pushed me into the Capitol, and the government began filing ex parte about him in 2024. So I didn't know about it. They filed secret filings that only the court got. But that came up in one of our hearings, and I was not happy about it. And Judge Contreras said, "Hey, you guys need to move on it quickly or do whatever." Then he ended up getting arrested, and
He
I
being
began digging in.
he being the guy that shoved you. You were making motions to identify him. The prosecutors are making motions ex parte, meaning you're not there, you're not apprised of it. The basis
Yeah.
of which is to maintain his identity secret.
Well, the first motion I filed on him, the court reminded them that, hey, you have an obligation if you have any information on him. Then the government began filing ex parte, like we may have, we don't know, but they did have information. But they were making it out to the judge like they didn't. Um, and then they finally arrested him. And in the announcement when he was arrested, it mentioned that the FBI had gone down to his place of employment in a little county in Indiana, but he actually lived in another county about 80 miles away. I began looking into it, and the only real employer in that little county was a top secret military base where you have to have a security clearance to work at. And, they do JSOC support, they do military high tech research and whatnot. And I filed another motion like, hey, I think, and I found a picture of him on the internet where he had worked for the military in Afghanistan back in the day. So I filed a motion on that, and the judge actually granted it. And the government was required to produce the information that, yeah, he did have a security clearance.
So he had a security
Um,
clearance. Some people might say that that might not be definitive of anything because a lot of the people who were there were veterans and presumably they would have had security clearances. But from what I understand of what you're describing, the government was going out of the way to try to protect the identity of this individual from you.
and again, this was one of the most involved individuals at the Capitol. He was at the very front of pushing through the police line in the scaffolding, one of the first people in the Capitol. Later in the day, he was at the tunnel where they're doing the heave ho, and he was probably on top of Roseanne Boylan when she died, from what I can tell from pictures and video. Um, like, and he was at another door where he's pulling police away from the door and pushing the door open. So he was very involved that day, and yet they're going after me for being entirely peaceful.
Well,
Um,
I,
and just to put it in context, they had multiple tips on him back in 2021. They renewed his security clearance in 2023. The Biden administration renewed his security clearance in 2023. I don't get it, but yeah, like maybe he had a good reason for having a security clearance, but I have a right to ask about it and try to defend myself.
well, that's an interesting fact is that he had a clearance. It was renewed. How do you know that it was renewed in 2023?
So the judge required the government to produce information. They produced a filing under seal, which unfortunately I can't share to the public, but they did produce a filing disclosing information. And we chatted about it a little bit in our October status hearing. So if the minutes of that ever come out, it'll be in there as well.
All right. So it's interesting that he didn't face charges as of 2023. He was known to authorities, and yet he has his security clearance renewed under the Biden administration in 2023. Do you know if and are you able to disclose whether or not this individual ever ended up facing charges?
Yeah, he did. Like after the court began pressuring them to produce any information they had, the government finally did make an arrest on him.
And
But
what do
they
they
didn't
charge him
do
with?
that. Uh, he had quite a few charges because really I had documented it pretty well, like what he had done, and they couldn't hide it, right? But he got off like everybody else did after the inauguration.
Yeah, so he got off. He was not specifically named. Well, he wasn't specifically named, but he was under the umbrella of the blanket pardon.
Correct. Yeah, so I had to fight my case for 4 years. He came in, he had to fight it for about half a year, and he got off. Right. So anyway, but
Okay,
yeah,
and
there were a lot of
you
different.
never found out why or if there was a reason for which he wasn't charged until later, other than government incompetence. Like you don't know if he was acting as a government informant to rat out the others, maybe to save his own ass, or whether or not he was something of
I tried to pry more information, and the government, they try to be as vague as they can on that. And they didn't want to really give any more information. But he was working at a top secret base and he had a security clearance. So,
that was the government then, and the government now. Have you made any renewed requests for the identity of this individual or explanations as to why he was, if not protected, at least not prosecuted for the better part of 2 years?
well, right after at the inauguration, I ran into Ed Martin. And Ed Martin actually, he knew I had found a lot of undercovers in the crowd and whatnot. And he actually told me I should file a motion to get whatever I wanted. And so I did that maybe a week or two after that. And then the government began opposing my motion, which I did not expect. And that led to me continue to fight them and fight that appeal to not get that discovery clause back. But yeah, I don't know if Ed had a change of heart or if people put him up to opposing me after I filed that motion, but I'm not real happy about it.
Was it, with, not that it matters who the name is behind it, was it Ed's name behind it, or was it Pam Bondi's name behind it, or is it just the prosecutor? I don't know, whoever it is.
Well, Ed was the U.S. attorney there at the time, so
Hmm.
he ran Washington there for a bit.
So, I mean, I guess I'll see if I missed any questions about the details, but ultimately you defend yourself quasi successfully. The Fisher decision came down. You ultimately had the bigger part of your charges dropped. You continued effectively fighting on your own, and then Trump wins by the grace of God, and you get the pardon.
Mm-hmm.
What happens after? First of all, like, what's your feeling when you get the pardon? What happens after the pardon?
Well, again, I didn't get pardoned. I got the charges dropped on it. So a little bit different. I never got convicted of anything. Uh, for me, it felt good. Like I could have gone to trial. I had a trial scheduled in December of 2024. I could have been in trial potentially on inauguration day if it would have continued that long. Um, but thereafter the election, a lot of people began trying to get continuations into the next administration. And my judge signaled in another case that he may be open to doing continuations. And so I decided I would file a motion to continue my trial into the Trump administration, kind of as a tactical automatic win, right? Like my goal as a defendant is to beat the allegations no matter what, right? I don't have to beat them in trial. I can beat them anyway. And so I filed a motion to continue my case. The government opposed it, and the judge granted it. And I became the first defendant to win a continuation into the Trump administration. And then I filed a motion to attend the inauguration, and I got to go to the inaugural ball.
So you file a motion to continue your trial, even though your charges have been dropped.
Well, they hadn't been dropped at that point. I beat three of them. This was before the inauguration.
Okay, fine. Sorry. I'm trying to figure out the practicality of
Yeah.
how you make a motion to continue if you've already
Yeah.
been, if your charge has been dropped
So,
under the blanket.
yeah, after the election, you had the transition period, and the Biden DOJ, they were doubling down on going after people. They were continuing to arrest people. They were really pressuring, like anybody who had a sentencing during that time, they wanted them taken into custody immediately, and like the book thrown at them. So during that period of time, I was scheduled to go to trial in December, like halfway between the election and inauguration, and I filed a motion to continue at that point.
Okay, so the motion continue. They put off your trial for however long. You get the charges dismissed under the pardon, whatever you want to call it, when Trump comes in.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do to maintain this case alive so that you can try to, I don't know, compel more discovery? Or what happens after Trump comes in and your charges are dropped?
In my case, the government filed a motion to dismiss. The judge granted it, and then I did file a motion to compel discovery, and the government ended up opposing it after Ed told me to file it. And yeah, we fought back and forth on that for a month or two, and eventually the judge ruled against me, and then I filed a motion to reconsider, and he rejected me on that, and now I'm doing an appeal. So,
who are you dealing with as a prosecutor now in the Trump administration?
oh, I don't even remember the dude's name. Like, Like they had a lady they put in right after the inauguration, and then she got canned at some point, and then they like when I continued to fight it, they moved it to like a another guy, and I only had to deal with him for like one or two filings, so I don't even remember him right now.
All right, I'm going to ask you this because, like, what is your impression of what's going on now under the current Trump DOJ? Like, you have firsthand knowledge of certain chicanery that was afoot under the Biden administration. One would think that the current DOJ would want to put all of that on absolute blast in order to go after the people who were involved with orchestrating January 6th. Without getting into it, if you can't disclose it, you're aware of stuff that has not been made public that you would think a current Department of Justice would want to make public as relates to the previous administration?
Yeah, Trump campaigned on January 6th being a Fedsurrection, so why not actually put information out there that would prove it, for one? And I know they do have information that would prove it. But beyond that, there was a great weaponization of government against Americans like me. And why aren't you holding anyone accountable for that? And I'm not real happy about the inaction on that. But anyway, we're going to go to Washington tomorrow and draw attention to it. But yeah, I think the DOJ could do more. They could do more. And if nobody is held accountable, I think it'll happen again. And you've got people like, Jocelyn Ballantine in the DOJ right now that if she were to remain in there, like after the Trump presidency, she might be involved in prosecuting him again. Like they've got some really terrible people. And I know better than most the dirty tricks that they would pull, the lies that they would tell in the filings, and the discovery that they would withhold. Like there were, for instance, like I requested the body cams for my arrest back in 2023. The government never responded to my request on that. And then I requested again early in 2024. And then it came back that they had let it go long enough to where the body cams had been automatically deleted by the retention system. So they had allowed evidence to be destroyed because they had not acted on my discovery request within a reasonable amount of time. Yeah, a lot of different shenanigans like that. But anyway, I'll write a book about it someday. But just
Well,
a lot of details thrown at you real quick here, Viva.
no. Well, it's incredible. I mean, some of this stuff we're aware of, and I'm trying to get to the nitty gritty of it because it's not just not responding to a request for disclosure or whatever. It's destruction of potentially exculpatory evidence. I mean, it's shocking and egregious. And you mentioned that a lot of the prosecutors that you came across have since been fired. And so maybe it's my confirmation bias to look at the one big name who hasn't. I'm shocked that it's still going on under this administration, and not out of the perspective of trying to criticize them. One would think they would want to go after this and expose everything that they now have in their possession from the prior administration. And I don't think that they have, and I don't know how to explain it.
Well, that one prosecutor, she was on a big case, a Proud Boys case, right? And a lot of shenanigans in there where the government withheld information, hid information. And I mentioned the undercover police that I found in my filings. I put it out there. And at the time, the Proud Boys trial was going on. And by me filing on a lot of that information, they had to produce new discovery to the Proud Boys during their trial of how some of these officers had like infiltrated the Proud Boys, were communicating with them on Telegram. And that prosecutor was involved in all that, withholding the information of the undercovers related to the Proud Boys. So I don't know why they're employing her. She should be fired.
Are you still in touch with, or have you heard from Ed Martin recently?
I don't really talk to him anymore. I'm not happy how he handled it, but yeah, kind of shocking. I kind of wonder if people above him might have put him up to that, but I'm not happy with it. Kind of been a pain in my neck to have to keep fighting it.
And now I said I would get to a question here. Did you get any footage of the female officer who had thrown pepper spray into the crowd? I don't know if we're talking about the name whose name we don't name, but you didn't get any meaningful footage of what people might consider to be provocative antagonism from the police on that day?
I've looked at thousands of hours of footage, so like without knowing more of the details of what they're referring to.
No, but you didn't
Uh,
you didn't capture any yourself of cops opening fire with pepper bullets or whatever they call them.
yeah, I wasn't even in that area. Yeah.
Um, are- I mean, I want to know what you're dealing, what the perspective is with the current administration. You have not had any direct communications with Pam Bondi.
No, I have not. The Initially we were real happy with that first week of the Trump administration. They were on fire, doing a lot of great things, and then we've kind of slowed into a lull where the accountability we wanted on the fronts that need it most never really happened. But President Trump, he did issue an executive order on the weaponization of government that ordered the attorney general to correct past misconduct. And that order named the January 6th defendants as victims of the Biden administration weaponization of government. And like Trump ordered it, Bondi hasn't really done anything about it. And we're waiting. Like they should correct that weaponization.
Um, Let me ask you, as relates to your ordeal, January 6th, is there anything that I didn't ask that I ought to have, or a detail that you want to specifically mention? I think it's been pretty thorough. I'm
Yeah,
looking to the chat to see
I
if I missed.
mean, I could go into a ton more details, quite frankly, Viva, but like I'd like to reemphasize the human toll that it took on people and to put your life on hold. Like this dominated the lives of hundreds of people for 4 years and very difficult. Um, uh, Unless you actually went through it, you don't know the pressure that people were under. And a few people like Matt Perna and Jordan Meacham ended up taking their own lives because, their entire world fell apart and it looked hopeless and the government was coming to crush them. And we should never live in a country where you have a government weaponized against the people for essentially speech, the freedom of speech. And, I'll leave you with that. But I could
Yeah.
go into a lot more details about what happened.
Well, let me get one other question. That was the segue to make sure I covered everything, because I'm not going to forget to cover one story that I wanted to hear more detail of, is when you tipped in the kayak in in frigid waters and spent 3 hours there. But the tip question,
Okay.
which maybe will be a segue, I would like to know his thoughts on the alleged caves tunnels, supposedly at the Grand Canyon. Oh, come on, get the tip question here. Supposedly in the Grand Canyon, since he worked there. I think I heard Rogan talk about this as well, whether or not there's or either like from ancient times or whatever. Do you know anything about any caves or tunnels in Grand Canyon?
There are a lot of different caves in the Grand Canyon. I think a little bit of what you see on YouTube may be made up. Be careful with that. But
Oh,
I think there are,
just a little.
yeah, a little bit. There are caves in the Grand Canyon, and I know a few of them have maybe Indian artifacts in there, but I don't think you got any like Egyptian stuff in there. But yeah, there are a lot of caves in the Grand Canyon.
Okay, now tell me the story, and we'll leave on this and make it as long as short as you want to tell the anecdote. You're kayaking in what waters in winter where you tip and you spend 3 hours in frigid waters, struggling to survive?
All right. In 2015, I worked in Yellowstone National Park, and I worked in the finance office at the time. But we had a beautiful weekend in, I think it was October 9th, if I remember right. Um, and I wanted to do one final day of kayaking in the park. So I got a permit for Lewis Lake, going over to Shoshone Lake. And, you know, it started out beautifully, but in Yellowstone, and if you read the book Death in Yellowstone, especially the chapter Death in the Water, a lot of people will describe things similar to what I went through, where it might be calm and then the weather can change very quickly to where the waves pick up, the wind picks up. And it did to me when I was out on my kayak, and I fought it as long as I could, but the waves are like coming over the edge of my kayak. And eventually it took me over. And I knew from living in the park that if you went in the water, you had about an hour to live. And
What
I was the
season is it?
only one.
Is it winter?
October, right? It
Okay,
was
so
a
it's
beautiful
cold.
day, but you had about 45, 48-degree water, very cold. Um, and I went into hypothermia within 10 or 15 minutes, but I kept fighting. And eventually, after 3.5 hours, I got to shore. So
Swimming.
it,
or paddling?
No, I swam out. Like I couldn't get back in the. I tried getting back in the kayak, but the water was too choppy to do it.
And
So then,
without trying to make you neurotic, does that hypothermia, that state of hypothermia for an extended period of time, does it cause any damage, lasting damage to the heart?
well, they wanted to do a check on me after I got out, um, and I felt like if the lake hadn't killed me already, probably wasn't my day to die. But by the following Monday, like I don't know what it was, just everything in my body kind of drained, and I felt like Walking Dead nearly. And so I did go to the clinic. I got a blood test, and they measured like the levels of muscle breakdown in your blood, and like the levels in me were like off the charts. Like, and typically that'll drop
It's
day after
called
day after day.
the word for it is oh
It's like
gosh,
yeah, it's a muscle enzyme,
yeah, muscle.
but
It's what happens to marathon to like Ironman muscle breakdown test. It's called rhabdomyolysis or rhabdo something. Rhabdo is like when you overexert, your muscle breaks down and it causes like kidney failure. But um, dude, that's wild. So the levels were off the chart, and then what? They give you medication, or do you just it eventually
it, you know,
stabilized?
I took it easy for about a week. I had to take time off work, and like I had no energy, and it felt like I died, but I hadn't actually died, right? And but eventually, then there was no kidney damage. I did have a high sensitivity to cold that winter. Like if you had heat stroke, you're more sensitive to heat, and I was very sensitive to cold after that. Um, but yeah, very. It was a miraculous thing that I got out of the lake
In
and
your
lived.
mind, you were prepared to die, or you were believing you believed
Correct.
you're going to
Yeah,
die.
I did. Yeah. Yeah, I thought, well, I knew like your temperature drops within an hour to where you normally would die. But I tried to keep moving my limbs, keep going, and not give up. I didn't want to like slip into that cold sleep that'll kill you. Um, but I kind of made peace with my death, and then I kept fighting. Uh, and after the sun went down, it got even colder, and like up to that point, I would get tired, I'd get fatigued, but after that I kind of made up my mind, I'm going to try to get my body as close to shore to hopefully make it easier for the search and rescue teams to recover my dead body. But I'm gonna give whatever energy I have left in my body to getting closer to the shore. And I just looked at the biggest tree I saw on the shore, very far away, and I kept swimming toward it. And like I probably swam hour and a half, 2 hours at that point without stopping. I don't know how I did it, but I did it.
That's wild. There's a question in our locals community. At the risk of asking it, Anita B. Deep says, "Do you have any friends who basically turned on you and tried to say you were guilty? I don't know, presume to get some preferential treatment on there." And well, I know there was some infighting, and I don't want to get into it, but did anybody try to throw you under the bus to save their own asses?
Uh, not that I'm aware of. There were a lot of I, there were definitely bad actors within the January 6th community that I think tried to cause trouble. Like my brother was my co-defendant. He never turned on me. There were other people in life that I knew before January 6th who would no longer have anything to do with me. There were people I knew in the community that turned me in. Actually, a former coworker of mine. I'd been a tour guide at the Kansas State Capitol back in the day, and one of my former coworkers, she went on to be a tour guide at the U.S. Capitol, and she wasn't at the time, but she had turned me in. But yeah, a lot of people turned me in.
It's amazing. All right. Will, thank you for. I'm going to go on live and stay with our locals community, but I want to thank you. And I think we got to everything here, and I'll cover some stuff afterwards. But I'll text you after. This has been amazing. I don't know what your perspective is or your plans for the current administration to keep going, but it sounds like you do have some, and we'll see what happens on appeal. But you'll keep me up to date.
I encourage them to keep doing it, and pleasure to join you, Viva. And look forward to chatting with you again.
Awesome, man. Godspeed.